welcome back to the Found in Translation Talk Show, the talk show that stacks truth about politics and today's hottest headlines. This show is Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for watching us live on Facebook, Twitter, and if you're watching or listening to this on YouTube or as a podcast or even on the radio at WPPMLP 106.5 FM in Philadelphia, hashtag People Power Media. Again, welcome back to Found in Translations Talk Show. We stack truth about politics and today's hottest issues. You know, I often like to say this, Ray Collazo. What I like to say is there's what's going on in Capitol Hill. Things that go on in the UN. Issues that take place abroad, whether it's the Middle East, which we're going to talk about in the first segment of our show, in Latin America, in our island of Puerto Rico, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And then there's the conversation that happens at the barbershop, happens at the beauty salon, happens at the church picnic, happens at the barbecue. We are here to be that bridge to make that understanding of what's going on nationally, internationally, in the halls of your city hall, halls of Congress, that impact your life and how you can get engaged in the conversation. Again, this is your host of the Found in Translation Talk Show, Ray Collazo. Later on in the show, we are going to discuss the ongoing terremotos, the tragedies that continue to take place with these terrible earthquakes and the impact on the island of Puerto Rico, the island of Borinquen, with Charlyn, Gaztambide, Hanen, and other guests from the island that are involved in recovery efforts and also advocacy to make sure that our community gets its fair share of resources. But first, we all know that our hearts and minds have been with the people in the Middle East, the people, our service members, and everyone involved in this very tense international drama that's taken place between the U.S. government and the Iranian government. And I say that very purposely because, as we know, all of our folks certainly want peace and stability in that part of the world, in this country. And we want to engage our Found in Translation community, not only to inform you what's really going on and put what's happened in the last few weeks in historical context, but also how it impacts our lives. Many people that live in the mainland United States may not believe or feel like this impacts them much day to day, but in fact, it really does impact us, and it really connects to some of the issues domestically that impact the Latino community and other people of color that we often focus on here on Found in Translation. So to begin our first half of the show, again, we're going to talk about Puerto Rico with Charlyn and other leaders at 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific, 9:30 in Puerto Rico. But again, we're going to start the show talking about this issue with Iran and really learn something. Get your notepads out today, fam. We're going to school you. My first panelist I want to bring to the stage is the foreign policy analyst for the Found in Translation Talk Show and a great friend to the show, and a proud military veteran himself, Leo Cruz. Leo, brother, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Ray, for having me. I'm glad to be here tonight. Wish we had other good topics to talk about, but obviously started the year out with a bang, literally, and it's kind of been a busy week. So glad to be on the show to talk about what's going on in Iran, Iraq, and the Middle East and elsewhere.
Well, I appreciate you, Leo. But, you know, between your Washington Nationals, you've had a lot of attitude over the last few months, and even historically, you are there without a doubt the number one Tampa Bay Lightning Puerto Rican fan in the. I would say that exists. So between those nightmares I have with Martin St. Louis taking that cup away from my Flyers, you've had enough good luck with the sport. So we can engage in other conversations. And of course, we really wanted to bring to this conversation the perspective of not only people that have someone that has great depth in Iranian and Middle Eastern issues, but also can speak to how this impacts the Iranian American community, a very vibrant part of our nation here. And we're really proud to have with us Dr. Pouya Alimagham, professor at MIT, who's releasing a book in the coming weeks, Contesting the Iranian Revolution, the Green Uprisings. Dr. Alimagham, welcome to Found in Translation.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for providing me with the space to talk about some issues that really doesn't get spoken about much on the mainstream media, at least from a perspective from somebody who is deeply connected to the region.
Well, Doctor, we really appreciate being on the show. And in typical, you Iranian brothers, you know how to do the 5 o'clock shadow. That's all I got to say. One day we'll figure it out. I mean, you guys got the skills. What can I say? Doctor, let's start with you. Just, it's been quite a few weeks. And if you could just sort of just ground this conversation and what's taking place in Iran and the Middle East over the last few weeks, sort of where we are, because some people believe like the tensions have simmered, but it doesn't feel like the tension. It still feels pretty tense to me.
Very tense. It's been a very tumultuous week. For most Americans, I think that this is a conflict that or turmoil that is the culmination of a week-long worth of events, or maybe even since the summer. But in reality, we have to take a more panoramic view onto this timeline. In 2015, Iran and the United States and the European powers and Russia and China signed a nuclear agreement that was supposed to curtail Iran's nuclear program, ensure that it was for civilian purposes. It was actually holding, it was working. President Trump, amongst the many points that he ran on, one was to subvert the Iranian nuclear agreement. And that's what he did when he came into office. Since his pulling out of the nuclear agreement and the sanctions that he has imposed on the country that basically on an economy that feeds 83 million people, it's pretty much put the entire region, Iran and the United States, onto a collision course that is really culminating now. And so my point being is that this hasn't been a week in the making, but more like 12 months or 14 months in the making, ever since President Trump sanctioned Iran and sanctioned it to the teeth.
You know, it's very ironic because one of the principal foreign policy campaign platforms that President Trump ran on was that A, the Iran deal wasn't good and he was going to get rid of it, and B, he would figure out another way or a better way to deal with Iran, and obviously nuclear proliferation always kind of being the touchstone issue there. And actually now we seem to have gone backwards, which was actually very predictable by most foreign analysts. So can you share with us how this administration in the last years engaging with Iran, and specifically how they approached the Iranian deal, which the Obama administration passed, brought us to today?
Yeah, so I mean, you really know where the Trump administration stands on the Iran nuclear agreement if you listen to Secretary Pompeo. Secretary Pompeo is a spokesperson essentially for the sanctions program on Iran and what he expects in return for the lifting or the relifting of the sanctions. And essentially he demands of the Iranians a total surrender of their missile defense program, scrapping their entire civilian nuclear program, basically letting the United States dictate all of Iran's foreign policy. And of course, that's not something that's acceptable to any independent and sovereign nation. And so the response has been to continuously ramp up sanctions on Iran, and then also ban Iranians from coming to the United States, and even banning Iran's foreign minister from coming to the United States, even though he's allowed to do so in order to attend international meetings like the General Assembly of the United Nations. So the point being is that these are these sanctions. There are these very unacceptable demands that Secretary Pompeo has leveled onto Iran, and then also closed every avenue of negotiation by banning even the secretary of or the foreign minister of the Iranians from coming to the United States, or really having an open channel so that there can be some dialogue. It almost seems like they talk at each other instead of talking to each other. And this is actually reminiscent of 40 years ago when Iran and the United States really began to be at odds with each other. They really talk at each other instead of talking to each other. And that was what was really interesting about the Iran nuclear agreement, is that they were actually finally talking to each other. And old adversaries, when they talk to each other, there's much more room for understanding. When they're talking at each other, when they're talking through other people, like the Saudis, there's a lot more room for misunderstanding, and that's what we see happening now. No,
and it was interesting because the right's critique of that deal was that, well, basically it was too much money for what the United States got out of the deal.
Yeah,
and fast forward to what is considered, and we don't get to talk about it much because there's so much other drama in this administration, which is, you could argue the biggest foreign policy dilemma the United States has, which is North Korea. And so what we would pay for to resolve that problem, right? So, and even though the administration's exaggerated and it's essentially lied at points around how much money was owed or paid for to Iran, I want to bring Leo Cruz in this conversation because Leo, not only as a foreign policy analyst, but as a military veteran. Thank you for your service, brother. I think about you and people, our Iranian American friends that have a lot of. This is very personal because these issues impact real people. So, Leo, why don't we start with what were your thoughts as a veteran and foreign policy analyst, when you heard that there was an airstrike that was going in Iraq that could potentially harm people? Because I know that must have been quite a feeling and a very tense night the other day for you.
Yes, thanks, Ray. And Yeah, it was. It was one of those reminiscent of the mid 2000s when rocket attacks in Baghdad were, an everyday occurrence. We had moved away from that. We had cooperated and established a secure Iraq. We have been working with Iraq to fight ISIS in the Syria-Iraq area. That engagement, as much as the president would like to say that they are no longer in existence, they are definitely in existence. They are definitely biding their time. And with the situation previous to what happened in the past week with Turkey and Syria, ISIS is regaining their strength. It is still winter, but we are going to see repercussions of this later on. And right now, our allies are kind of in a lurch, and usually they rely on American dependence, reliability to be the steadfast hand and say we're going to do the right thing. This action was not that type of action, and so now the repercussions are there, where our allies are slowly removing themselves from the situation, and we are now engaging and deploying more troops. We have about 15,000 additional troops in the area. As Donald Trump promised that we were going to be ending our wars, he has not done the exact opposite. And so, yeah, it's been one of those things where I remember, getting those emails about, hey, lost a buddy here, lost a buddy there. And thankfully, that's not the situation that we've had in this past week, but it's something that could happen. There have been innocent lives lost, both in Iraq and as we're learning in Iran with the Ukrainian flight that was downed by an Iranian missile. So, as most of the intelligence has stated, and so yeah, it's been a concern, and I think what's happening on the Hill right now, as far as trying to curtail the president's actions, comes at more about saying we don't need any more American lives to be lost based on Donald Trump's ego.
Leo, let me ask you. So, one of the other dynamics that's taking place here, of course, you just referred to it, which is that that the NATO alliance and sort of this rules of engagement with American allied countries for decades now, post World War II, has really been a hallmark of our foreign policy, and now that's sort of endangered. So, how does this impact this growing lack of communication, which Dr. Alimagham referred to a moment ago with Iran and other Middle Eastern players? This sort of animosity, attention that's growing with our NATO allies. So, what do you see as sort of the next steps that you're going to be looking at to see, how this plays out? Because it seems like we have less and less friends than we used to have, and it's not getting us, it's not making us any safer.
That's right. And then the thing is, our NATO allies believe that perhaps this is just a temporary experience in the Trump administration, but the America First policy that this administration has been advocating for has led to America being alone. And, the United States finds itself more isolated from its allies and partners, and many have condemned the actions of the Trump administration, not only in this past week, but over the entirety of their control of power, because they have continued to bash our allies and cozy up to those that in previous administrations, Democrat and Republican, have called them tyrants, dictators, and whether it's North Korea, Iran, or Russia, as Bush called them, the axis of evil, these are who the people Donald Trump wants to hang out with and be like. And that's not what American democracy was set up to be like.
And you're listening to Leo Cruz, Founding Translations foreign policy analyst, as well as Iranian affairs expert and new friend to the show, but hopefully we look forward to continue to work with him, Dr. Pouya Alimagham, if we can get him, the good doctor, back on air. And we're talking about what's happening in Iran and the Middle East. And one of the things that I wanted to kick this back to you, Professor, because, you know, one of the things we want to do here is, as I was sharing you and your network as we were booking you for the show this week, is that we really want to connect the dots for our audience. You know, a lot of our audience are Latino activists, people of color that engage primarily in domestic issues. Occasionally we get into issues related to issues like, immigration, sort of a binational issue. Of course, Puerto Rico is sort of something in between foreign and domestic. But oftentimes it's hard for us, a lot of us, to sort of wrap our minds around how foreign affairs, particularly in locations like Iran, impact us in the United States. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring you into this conversation was to share with us how this connects, how this relates to our day-to-day lives here, and also how it connects to a lot of our brothers and sisters like you, my friend, that are Iranian Americans that live amongst us, work together, and are contributing to this country, and now are having to deal with this tension from both sides of the fence, if you will. So can you share with us share with us how this connects to a lot of the other domestic issues we're dealing with, and anything you'd like to share about how this issue has impacted the Iranian American community this past week?
Yes, thank you. Before I do, I just want to echo a couple of Mr. Cruz's points. I think he's absolutely right when he said that, what we've done in relation to ISIS, hasn't been a total destruction of the organization. It still kind of persists. And in fact, the killing of General Soleimani on Friday really was something that ISIS is now celebrating. General Soleimani was on the grounds leading the charge against ISIS. He was essentially the first one in Iraq after ISIS took Mosul and was marching south towards Baghdad. He was the first one that appeared on the scene and began directing the formation of militias to help basically fortify Baghdad. And then once Baghdad was fortified, help lead the charge against ISIS throughout the following years after 2014. The other point I really wanted to say was that Mr. Cruz is absolutely right. There's a lot of innocent people in Iraq and in that Ukrainian airliner that have been lost or have been threatened. I would also add that the sanctions that have been on Iran for the past year or 14, 15 months have also led to a lot of loss of innocent life amongst Iranians, especially those who are cancer patients and are not allowed or prevented from getting really specialized medicine to treat their illnesses. So it's really tragic what's happening. Now, to segue that into how it affects Americans or how it affects Iranian Americans, those of us who live here, who care so much about the United States, and also who have a connection to Iran, but kind of hit from both angles. What happens in the Middle East always affects the United States for some reason. Such is the nature of America's military actions. It always affects a distant country and its people first, as well as American military personnel and their families back home. But we don't really get to feel it beyond that, beyond what we see on TV. We don't really get to see the consequences of those actions. As someone who's connected to that region, not just Iran, but the whole region, I still don't experience it firsthand, thankfully, and I'm grateful for that. But we know exactly what lives are lost. Like, for instance, the sanctions on Iran. We understand what impact it has on the people. And then, as it relates to Americans, it's also really important to know that there are domestic politics at play. Ever since the attack on or the assassination of General Soleimani happened on Friday, there has been less and less media coverage of the impeachment of President Donald Trump. So there's always this domestic politics at play, as well as issues over there. And Iranian Americans are kind of basically torn in both ways. We feel the anxieties here when it comes to President Trump's impeachment and what that means in terms of our domestic turmoil. But at the same time, our foreign policy and our military actions in the region, especially as it pertains to Iran, also hit us too, because we know that we have friends and family in Iran who have nothing to do with any of this. But they're the ones who are paying the heaviest price, especially as it relates to sanctions or maybe even an all-out war.
No, and Doctor, I'm so glad you touched on that issue as it relates to Iranian immigrants who have had ones that are in need of medical care that have not had an opportunity to be able to enter the country when in normal times that would have been a no-brainer to allow people critical medical care they need. because all of these issues are interconnected, thinking about the immigration issue, right? So, our communities very much experience them in different forms, but very similar actions, anti-immigrant fervor once this administration started with not only sort of this build the wall nonsense and the terror that some of these refugees have experienced on our southern border, but also people from Iran and other Middle Eastern countries being denied access to the country, that catastrophe with at the airports at the beginning of the administration over this past weekend. Dozens of Iranian Americans coming back from a concert on the Canadian border around the Seattle area were detained, harassed, bothered. Most of these people were all here legally, whether they were legal residents or U.S. citizens. So this is the kind of anti-immigrant, anti-Latino fervor, anti-Middle East, Persian, anti-Muslim fervor that has stoked this administration, and frankly is used as a distraction. You just said it, because what a coincidence that this issue gets flamed up right before the Senate trial is about to start, and over the holidays when other reporting and other evidence came out that his principles in the top brass, there was more evidence. And now Bolton, who was part of his foreign policy team, is willing to testify. So, wow, quinky dinky, like Puerto Ricans say, that this issue takes place. Dr. Alimagham, what else would you like people to know around this issue? Well, you literally teach classes on this subject. I remember being a small child and when, again, the Iranian Revolution began in the late 70s and the Iran-Iraq War really sort of spurred on the Shia-Sunni divisions. And this has been a big part of our political conversation for quite some time. But what should people know about Iran at this moment? And what do you see as what are the next steps? What's going to happen here? What should we be keeping an eye on as it relates to seeing these developments? Because this is not over.
No, it's not over. I would first say that history really matters. I am a historian. I teach Middle East history. As I teach U.S. foreign policy history as it relates to the Middle East. And I would say there is a tie that bonds, or a tie that binds not just Iranian history, but Latin American history. Iran experienced the first U.S. military overthrow, or the U.S. coup, in 1953. And it was such a success from a foreign policy standpoint then the following year, in 1954, the CIA overthrew Jacobo Arbenza's government in Guatemala, and then in 1973, Salvador Allende's government in Chile. And so this history really matters. This issue that Iran and the United States is happening, the issue that exists between them is a culmination of a long history. So what I would tell people is that don't look at a week or even a year's worth of events. Look at the history. There's a causal relationship to it. And also, it doesn't have to be this way. There was a lot of history before the U.S. overthrow of the Iranian democratically elected government of Iran in 1953, in which Iran looked to the United States for hope and inspiration when it was trying to kick out British colonial rule inside of Iran in the first half of the 20th century. Iranians in the early 20th century looked to the United States for hope because of America's own revolutionary history against the British. So while we may be at odds today, it doesn't mean we've always been at odds. Doesn't mean Iran and the United States have always been at odds, and it doesn't mean that they will always have to be at odds. There is a history. That history is important, but there's moments of history where they worked very much together, saw eye to eye, and I would say that there's a lot of hope for optimism, even though you really can't see it right now. Iran and the United States is still on a collision course. The Iranian government has said that what happened essentially yesterday with the missile attacks on Erbil and Ain al-Assad military bases in Iraq were really supposed to be symbolic more than anything else. Nobody was killed. But the issue of the assassination of General Soleimani is not over, they say, and they should expect more reprisals. I think they have a more marathon-like approach to this, and they wanted to kick off something symbolic first, and then we're supposed to wait and see what's supposed to happen later, unfortunately.
Let's bring Leo Cruz back in this conversation. Leo, what as a foreign policy analyst, what should we be following here? There's obviously, this is a very complicated subject. There's obviously a significant part of this conversation that we need to continue to follow as relates to what happens with Iraq, right? The parliament has called on the United States to get out. This complicates all kinds of things. Obviously, Soleimani was murdered in the country of Iraq, but the missile strike went into Iraq. So there's an Iraq dimension. This obviously impacts the rest of Saudi Arabia is in this conversation. It impacts everything that's going on. Russia percolates in the background, waiting to see what the sort of the U.S.'s role in the Middle East moving forward. So what should we be keeping an eye on the coming weeks and months as it relates to this issue, Leo?
Yeah, I think the doctor laid out some good points, and I do believe this is not the end of the situation. I think it's a temporary de-escalation. We are going to have to consider what happens potentially throughout this year. Typically, in a U.S. election year, most of our adversaries like to challenge an incumbent president, whether or not they're up for re-election or not. And it has shown in the Trump administration that his foreign policy is not something to be trusted, and that a lot of chaos could happen not only in the Middle East but around the world. And so the question is going to be, as we move forward, as we had mentioned with our allies in the fight against ISIS, in the growing hostilities between Saudi Arabia and Iran, growing hostilities towards Israel. These are all going to be concerns. It's going to be concerning for how the president will react, and how much the United States will look the other way for other actors taking their own actions in the region, to include, like I said earlier, talking about how Turkey was given carte blanche to invade into the Kurdish territories of Syria. So the thing is, usually wars in the winter, particularly in this region of the world, are not very hot. But once the winter goes away, I would definitely expect more action to be handled. And one thing I think also to look at as a missed opportunity, and maybe the doctor could talk more about it, considering his book on the Green Revolution, was that there was movement in Iran with other factions dissatisfied with the existing government. That seems to have disappeared with the execution and assassination of Soleimani. And now it's of nationalistic pride to honor the general, to honor the government, and it'll be interesting to see how long this lasts, this unity in Iran, when the situation moves forward, as he had mentioned about sanctions, mentioned about the Iran nuclear deal, and the right now the only one that's really not compliant with the Iran nuclear deal is the United States.
Leo, appreciate your leadership, brother. And you just hinted on something which we're going to continue to monitor, which is, of course, how does this impact the 2020 elections? Foreign policy, frankly, had not been much of a priority in our general conversation, and certainly amongst the Democratic primary field, that foreign policy has not been, and Democratic voters don't seem to be really focused on that. How does that change the dynamics? And how does that change the conversation on foreign policy? Leo, appreciate you, brother. Thank you for joining. We're going to keep you on as our foreign affairs correspondent, brother. Con Boricua, we're always proud of you and your service on many levels. And Dr. Pouya Alimagham, of course, your book's coming out next month, Contesting the Iranian Revolution, the Green Uprisings. Let people know what to expect with the book, and anything else you'd like to share with our founding translation community.
One last point. I think that it's really important to remember that before, when he was civilian Trump in 2011, he tweeted multiple tweets about President Obama, then President Obama, who was seeking re-election. Trump said, watch Obama start a war with Iran to basically become re-elected. Because anytime there's an external threat, people rally behind their leadership. And he said that then, and we might not be at war with Iran, but that conflict that's brewing now with Iran is rallying people around President Trump. He's showing himself as tough. And just like Mr. Cruz said, this is also working to the benefit of the Iranian government. There was a lot of protests in November domestically, a lot of divisions that have occurred because of those protests, especially with the death toll of around between 1,000 or so, 1,000 or 1,500 or so. We don't actually know the entire death toll. But we do know now that this what is considered an attack on Iran, even though it happened on Iraqi soil. It was basically Iran's most revered general who was killed, has angered a lot of Iranians who may not care about the Iranian government and now are kind of banding together. Not everybody, but many are banding together in opposition to this what they call a foreign aggression. So I think it's really unfortunate that what we're saying, and I think Mr. Cruz is actually spot on about foreign policy and how there's a domestic audience in both ways.
Well, Dr. Alimagham, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for bringing this to the conversation. Thank you again to Dr. Sal Rad for bringing you into the conversation. Hopefully she feels better. She was sick, but you came out the bullpen here to save us, if you will. And again, all of these issues impact real people. And again, we want to continue to discuss how we can build these bridges between our communities, which are already very strong. We've got a lot of love for the Iranian American community and other communities from the Middle East. But thank you, Doctor, and we'll be in touch very soon. And that was Dr. Pouya Alimagham, a professor in Iranian American studies, talking about what's going on with these foreign affairs. But I know there's a lot of people that care so much about what's happening around issues related to the island of Puerto Rico, the latest storms, which have impacted our community, which is so very sad. And we want to get right to it. The terrible earthquakes that have taken place in Puerto Rico have exacerbated many of the issues that we've been concerned about, sort of post Maria, are now being exacerbated by these recent earthquakes and multiple earthquakes, really tragic. And so we wanted to get people not only that are from the island, on the island, sort of on the front lines dealing with this work, but also from the diaspora that are part of these recovery and advocacy efforts. So let's start with getting Miss Charlyn on the line, live on the show here. Charlyn, Gaztambide, Hanen, bienvenida. Dios le bendiga. Welcome to the show, Charlyn.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're very glad to be here with you and really appreciate your interest in Puerto Rico and everything that we have been going and we're still going on.
Well, you know what I say? I grew up in North Philadelphia, in a Barrio Boricua ahí in Philadelphia, Charlyn. And I tell people that when I walked in that door, I was in Orocovis because that was my mom's bohío. And so, Puerto Rico is very close to our heart, and we monitor those issues very closely here. And toda mi familia, González, Rosado, ahí en Dorado, Calle, todos los partes que están mirando ahora. Oh, Dios lo bendiga. We love you all so much. Charlyn, como Boricua, you were there. So let's start with ¿Qué pasó the other day? Did you feel it? And how are the people feeling on the island of Puerto Rico right now?
Oh my God, I felt it so bad. We're on the 9th floor and I was in the balcony. So can you imagine? I was like, oh my God, what is going on? I didn't feel the ones before, but the big one a couple of days ago, 4:25 a.m., it was like, they said 6.7, but finally they said it was 6.4, and it was really bad. Oh my God, it was terrifying. It was so long, so hard, it was, and even though this condominium, is very well, they constructed during the 70s. That was the best construction in Puerto Rico. They have all the rules, the guidelines for earthquakes. So this is very, very safe place. But even though we're all scared to death, everybody in the country, we're like walking on eggshells, it's like we're feeling every time that it's shaking. Even though when it's not shaking, I think we still have that feeling and we're all the time, oh my God, did it shook again? It's shaking again, we're waiting. They say that there might be a big one, so we're terrified. People are sleeping in the streets. They don't want to go home. And, we haven't recovered yet from Hurricane Maria. It has been 2 years. It's going to be 3 in September. And right now, some people are still with no roof. People that they finally got a new house because their house were really, they were destroyed by Maria. They finally got a new house, and now some of them have to move again because the house was destroyed by the earthquakes. We're really suffering a lot, and I think we don't deserve it.
Charlyn, can you speak to how our people on the island feel right now? Because I can imagine emotionally, to go from hurricanes, which, yes, it's terrible and it was extreme, but that's a cultural thing. You're in the tropics, cada año, that's something we're prepared for, but earthquakes. I didn't even know growing up here that we had earthquakes on the island in the Caribbean. So speak to the psychology of it now being another type of disaster that's impacting our community in a different way that we're not normally prepared for.
Exactly. That's what you're saying. We're used to storms and we're used to hurricanes. You can get ready. They announce you when they're coming. So we have time to get ready. But for earthquakes, there's no time. Nobody can tell you there's one coming. So right now we are, as I told you, walking over eggshells. Right now we're waiting any minute for the big one to happen. Where any minute, where a lot of people, they don't have electricity, no water. Some of them, when they got the electricity, the water went out. So right now it's raining a lot. Right now I'm speaking to you and I don't have electricity. It just went out like half hour ago. And I'm here right now in my condominium in the, we have like a gym downstairs, and I'm here because of the electricity plant, because if not, I wouldn't be able to do this.
Wow.
So we're really scared to death.
Wow, Charlyn, and all of on an emotional level, we are with you in prayer, we're with you in spirit. And one of the things, though, that I'm so proud of our Puerto Rican community and our leadership, not only on the island, of course, but in the diaspora, is that we're stepping to the plate and we are one people. So I want to bring on someone that really brings that full circle from Hispanics to Philanthropy, a great friend to the show, family, and one of the prides of the Philadelphia Puerto Rican Latino community, Nancy Santagio. Nancy, finally, welcome to Found in Translation, Nancy. You're like 5 years overdue. I'm back. 5 years overdue, huh? Nancy, first of all, I don't even know.
Forgive the hat, forget the T-shirt. I couldn't go back home.
This is what happens. Celebrities, they don't like to be sprung on. 151 Nancy. Nancy, first of all, I'm not even sure. Are you on the island right now, or are you in the States? Where are you right now?
Right now, I'm in Philadelphia. I couldn't fly back, so the hurricane hit on the day I was supposed to fly back. So I'm here.
So
I'm
Nancy,
being told by my neighbors my apartment is safe, which is good.
Where is your apartment now on the island, Nancy? Where is it?
In Miramar. I'm in Miramar, and like Charlyn, they were saying the same thing. Structurally, we're safe. They're saying the building was meant to sway, and even though we're not ready or prepared for earthquakes, we sit on a fault line. We should be, right? But that's not something we ever talk about. We talk about hurricanes, and so that's a real problem. Luckily, my apartment's safe. I am in Philadelphia, which is a good place to be stuck and with my family, but I had to find a quiet place to duck it and do an interview. But let's see. So we started a process. Probably the earthquake struck somewhere after 4 a.m. By 4:45, we had a text string going on. By 5 a.m., we had a WhatsApp group with leaders from all across the island, most of them who run nonprofit organizations, NGOs. We have friends from former Obama officials kind of joining in who've done disaster recovery, who helped in earthquake relief after Haiti. So we started a group of folks via WhatsApp. The good thing is that unlike the hurricane, although these are both of them catastrophic events, unlike the hurricane, we did not lose all connectivity, which allowed us immediately to check in with one another. And then the checking in process became a let's find people process. And from there, we started to organize. So we now have a WhatsApp group that's active all day and all night with, like I said, leaders from across the island, leaders from all walks of life, mostly NGOs, people who want everything from Foundation for Puerto Rico to, Apoyo Mutuo en Mariana, en Humacao, all these different organizations that all had experience working together after the hurricane. And for better or for worse, that experience has prepared us not for the earthquake, but how to respond to the human needs that folks have right now.
Nancy, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? And obviously, we're all kind of getting these reports, but what are you seeing as sort of the biggest needs right now? And I want to say it on sort of a couple levels. One is, sort of the immediate sort of personal needs. But I think one of these things that I think a lot of us are struggling with is, how do we help? What do we help with? But also between the immediate crisis that has to be dealt with, balanced with the fact that there should be a couple of government entities here that should be doing some of this. So how is your team balancing sort of getting the work done and complaining later, or dealing with the politics later, and reminding the government of Puerto Rico and the federal government that they have to get on this and treat us like the American citizens that we are?
Well, part of what we've been doing, honestly, is doing the work and complaining later. Even at one point in the WhatsApp chat, we were getting frustrated. And I finally had to say, guys, we will talk about this over drinks. Right now, I need us to stay focused on solutions. And so the group has committed to that. So we have folks that went to the different areas today. They went and they're reporting back. And so that, one of the things that we're doing is we have a Google document where everybody's filling in information. We have every piece of data that you could want because we collected a lot of this during the hurricane. We have every elected official's name, number, cell phone. So we have all these things in this document, and each of us are going to kind of continue to fill in information. So folks went out to the field today to report back to the group what they saw. And I will tell you, I was incredibly dismayed by what I heard. There's been no accurate census count yet. We don't know how many people are in shelters. There's an estimate of over 5,000. The last estimate was 5,200 and some. That number swelled from 1,100 the night before. So the numbers are growing. But what's happened is, in addition to the shelters, people have set up camps outside their homes. So there is no one figuring out how many people are sleeping outside their homes, no one organizing these camps, no one knowing where they are. So part of our strategy today was to go do the same kind of documenting and data collection that we had people do door to door after the hurricane. We're about to implement the same system. Right now, in each of the communities that our folks went to, there was no leadership on the ground, meaning the municipal leaders might be there, but those mayors are also needing help themselves. There is no federal leadership. There was no FEMA point person. There was no one with resources and any kind of rank or authority beyond mayor available to make decisions. So one of the emergency response units that were on the ground today in Guanica, the only ones that had lights, had to leave because they had no direction. And there was no one there to tell them whether they stay or go or what they should be doing. So they were packing up to leave. And when they leave, they take with them the only light in the entire town. So these are the problems that we're seeing right now. The concerns that we have is there are a lot of children living in these kind of makeshift camps. Parents are trying desperately to go through rubble and hold their lives together. Children are running around unsupervised, getting hurt, and worse. We even had somebody witness potential predatory behavior with children today. So I have children in danger. I have parents desperate, and I have no leadership other than the local leadership, which they themselves have lost homes and are trying to hold it all together. So the community's mobilizing because the community had to do it after the hurricane. They're doing it again. It shouldn't take us doing it, but we are. So today's conversations was around trauma-informed care. One of the things that we're very, very clear about is that the basic provisions that are needed are the food, the water, the medical supplies, very basic. It is not the same as last time. People cannot just ship things to Puerto Rico this time. First of all, the Jones Act has not been waived. One. So it's going to be incredibly costly and slow to get the products and goods to us. And two, it's easier and better, honestly, for the economy of Puerto Rico for people to send dollars to the nonprofits or the organizations they trust and let those people buy the supplies in the metropolitan areas and in the areas that are still with electricity, with supplies. You continue to feed the Puerto Rican economy that way as well, which is critical. So without the Jones Act being waived, we have issues with shipments getting in. So just sending things isn't going to work this time. It's actually faster and easier right now and get supplies to people who can move them on the ground now. So it's a little different this time. Immediate needs are the same immediate needs, but this time we have the shelter need, which is hard because we don't know when that's coming back. And the long-term need in this is now for me and for the folks that I'm working with, it is about the trauma and the emotional distress, the symptoms of PTSD we're seeing. And we all know our mother's favorite expression that hurt people hurt people. So if we don't handle the pain and the trauma and quite honestly, the anxiety and fear that people are feeling right now, it will turn into something else later. So for me, a priority is getting enough doctors, nurses, people trained in grief counseling, pastors, anybody who's got experience and training in crisis counseling, grief counseling, or trauma-informed care. We need those people on the island in a desperate way now and for the long term.
That's right. And I want to bring in, speaking of people that are engaged in philanthropy, I think Charlyn may have been bumped off. So as soon as she gets back on LB, let's get her on the show. But from the National Puerto Rican Chamber of Commerce, another Philly area person, Joel Berrocal, is on the line. Joel, welcome to the show again, brother. And speak to some of the work you're doing and your thoughts on how do we get people the resources they need and also support our Puerto Rican economy and our Puerto Rican business people and leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Ray, thanks for having me. Nancy kind of spoke on exactly what a point I was going to touch is unlike with our relief effort
Ahora
in
estamos en
Maria,
Berrocal.
where we supplies and donations because the supermarkets were empty. In this situation, a good portion of the island is still, the supermarkets are still full, and people have access to these places. So what we're seeing and what we're primarily focused on is going to be fundraising, and pretty much sending funds to the nonprofit leaders, the community leaders, people we know, trust, have relationships with, who can assess the situation more because obviously they're there, and really get allocated where we need to go, which is, like I said, a big change from Maria, where we were basically using post office boxes, little post office boxes, and sending them to each individual's houses. This time around, it's a lot different, and we do have a lot more support this time around. So I was really optimistic about that in my conversations over the past few days.
Let's get Charlyn back on the line because I know her Wi-Fi is a little shaky there, and she's been very patient. Charlyn, if you're there, if you could please speak to, I know you've been listening to the conversation, and if you could just speak to, do you agree with Nancy and Joel's assessment about the needs on the ground and how we can help our people on the island right now?
Jose, they're telling the truth. Definitely what they're saying is what is really going on, and we need a lot of help, especially those organizations that they help everybody. They have done a great job, sometimes even better than the government. I don't want to criticize, but I think that we really should help them to help us, especially the people in need. There's a lot of people in need that they have lost everything they had for all over their life, their house, their memories, everything. They are in the street with nothing, sleeping in their cars. It's very sad. Because this is, as you said, we're not used to this. We're used to hurricanes and storms, not to earthquakes. So they have the real great information about it.
Charlyn, what is your message to Puerto Ricans and others that are on the mainland that want to help and support? What should we know about what's going on in Puerto Rico right now that you don't see on television and you're not seeing in social media? Because there's so many elements to this. I mean, kids are not going to school in many parts of the island. There had already been a lot of detraction of our school system post Maria and through the economic crises. I can only imagine the access to healthcare is even more limited because of the lack of electricity and the infrastructure, some of the medical facilities. So there's a lot of levels to this. And just share with us anything else you'd like us to know about how we could help, but also what's going on with our people that maybe isn't getting as much attention in the headlines.
Okay, first of all, here in Puerto Rico, we want to thank you all so much, the people in la diaspora, because when we went through Maria, you guys were there for us. I was once in the diaspora. I lived for 8 years in Manhattan. It's a very bad feeling when you're out of the island and you see that the island is suffering, that the people are suffering. I really want to thank you all. We all from Puerto Rico want to thank you guys because you're always there for us. And you cannot imagine how much that means to us. So thank you for always being there, for helping us. I know that you're suffering too, because I was like you when George's, it was a real bad hurricane. I was in New York, and I suffer a lot because you want to be in Puerto Rico to help, but you can't, and you have your another life, you're in another country, and it's really hard. So I think that you should help the organizations that Nancy mentioned, and the Red Cross, and all those organizations that are helping everybody, giving food, giving people what they need. So we really thank you so much. We don't have words to thank you to all the Puerto Ricans that are in the States. Thank you. We love you. And we will always be here for you.
Oh, of course. Likewise. Nancy, if you could unmute yourself, because I want to ask you and also ask Joel basically the same question, which is, Nancy, over these last years, Nancy, if people don't know her, obviously with her work in philanthropy, with the Obama administration, education advocacy, Nancy's always been down with our community and always been a tireless advocate. But I think, Nancy, it's safe to say that post Maria, it's taken it to another level for so many of us. And so I wanted to ask you, Nancy, what have you learned about yourself and our community in these last 2 years and through these natural disasters and these and us being victims of the politics of the moment, what have you learned about our community's resilience and our people? Because it's been an incredible. I feel a lot more Puerto Rican than I did 3 years ago, and I felt pretty Puerto Rican then.
That's true. I'd say that we learned that we have our own strength. We learned not to depend on others when the help didn't come. So I think we learned not just to how to be good partners and good neighbors. We learned how to accept the help when we needed it, and we learned not to depend on others. That's the most important part. For me, on a personal level, I was in a journey when Superstorm Sandy hit New Jersey, New York, all of this area. I was still working with the Obama administration. And our president at the time looked at every presidential appointee and said, "You're being deployed. Everything else gets put on hold. You are being deployed," and everyone got to work. Every last presidential appointee spent time doing work on the storm. So we got to see firsthand what government can do when it's led the correct way. Unfortunately, this time around after Maria, we had to fight. And what I learned was I'm stronger and more powerful than I ever thought I was before. The fact that we fought for waivers and got them, the fact that we fought to have things done and we got it, I think strengthens our resolve for now. One of the reasons I decided to move back to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria was not that I didn't just want to be part of the relief effort. I wanted to be part of the recovery effort. And in that work, I learned how to lean on philanthropy, which is why Hispanics in Philanthropy right now is doing all the work it's doing around Puerto Rico. We just set up a new fund. That new fund is going to send money directly to those small organizations that are doing the real work. It's not going to be, forgive me, like some of the big organizations that we know about, that only 5 cents of your dollar goes to the people it's serving. That's not how we do business anymore. We're changing the way philanthropy works, so it works better for our community. We've learned how to build a system of support for the island, and we've learned how to access resources both philanthropically, politically, and across oceans. And I think all those learnings are getting us more and more prepared to handle the kind of emergencies we're seeing all over the world right now.
I want to bring Joel back into this conversation. Joel Berrocal from the National Puerto Rican Chamber of Commerce. What else would you like to share about the work you're doing? And what have you learned through this experience? Not only giving back to the island during crisis, but also a renewed commitment, I think, of all of us here, certainly on screen and watching this in the Founding Translation community to support the island and build it together. Because what I tell people is, my dad used to say Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans are like a little spice. You just put a drop on the world and look how much noise we've made and we've impacted. So when we work together, great things happen. So Joel, talk to us about the lesson you've learned out of this and anything you'd like to share with our community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I learned from Maria was how unified the diaspora can be when we come together for one goal. It was like nothing I've seen before. And what happened was in the past few days, as everything was going on with the earthquakes, that we essentially had an infrastructure of nonprofits, community leaders at the ready. Once this happened, I started making some calls, some emails, and we were mobilized, and we were pretty much ready to go at that point. So it was really, really impressive to see. I'm excited to see what we can do moving forward in the coming weeks. Something else that I didn't realize either, you never really appreciated it, is how much of a voice we are for the people on the island, because we have a voice in Congress, so we can affect change at the polling station. So that's something that I really learned over these past 2 years. But like I said, I'm excited to see us keep coming together and see what we could accomplish in the coming weeks.
Well, there's no question about that. And I want people to understand that they don't, while we do have to, like Nancy said, let's take care of people, then we'll complain later. We got to complain, whether it's tomorrow, the next day, next month, and certainly not only the continued advocacy, because there's funds from the Hurricane Maria that still haven't gotten to the island that the federal government owes. And, and the fact that, as Nancy's reporting and Charlyn's reporting on the island, there's still federal FEMA, this is their job to address emergencies and manage them as a federal agency, that still haven't gotten to a part of the island that is relatively easy to get to. It's a couple hours from San Juan. Charlyn, before we let you go, anything else you'd like to share from the island that we need to know? And what else should we know about the work you're doing to mobilize people and make sure everyone's safe? If Charlyn is still there. Su mensaje final para la gente. No te apures. Si quieres explicar en inglés, español, no importa. Su mensaje final.
I'm having trouble here. We have
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, Charlyn, can you hear us? Okay, so sorry. But we know you're doing some great work and monitoring. Nancy would like to get to you for your final word. Thank you for joining in La Última Hora, Nancy, and I know that we're going to bring you back. You need to be a regular. That's one of my goals here. You're the big you're doing so much.
I have a much better view if you bring me in from Puerto Rico.
There you go. We'll be able to Joel and the crew and Leo. We may have to do a live remotes down there. But Nancy, what else would you like to share? Obviously, we're promoting the work you're doing. You've put together some tremendous resources for us online and offline. So anything else I'd like to share about how people should get involved moving forward, because we are not there's so much more to do. I mean, people are homeless and we have to deal with this. Children are in danger, like you said. People aren't going to school. There's a variety of issues there. And what else should people be doing to support? Anything else you'd like to share with our folks?
Most importantly, I'd say we have two ways of getting information out to folks. Like I said, we're collecting it every day, every hour, around the clock. If you go to Hispanics in Philanthropy's webpage, the main page is hiponline.org. Hiponline.org takes you to a page that talks about what's happening in Puerto Rico. And every night we're putting updates with numbers, information like, hey, what are the evacuation routes if a tsunami should hit? Didn't have that. So we're making sure folks get those pieces of information plus data. Right from there, you can also go to hipgive.org. HipGive has an entire page to just raise money that we're deploying directly to the small nonprofits. So we want people to understand that it is important to find an organization on the ground that can help our folks. The big organizations are great too. They're needed. One of our big partners is World Central Kitchen. Chef Jose Andres is the best, but we're working hand in hand with him. And just like he's putting out the big meals, he still needs volunteers to get those meals out. So we're partnering with the big guys, but we know it's equally as important for us to support the small organizations that are the heart of those communities where people know their community intimately. Those are the folks that at the end of the day can say what their greatest needs are. So listen to the people and support those organizations as much as possible.
Our great friend, Javier Cuevas, said it best, who went to University of Mike West con mi primo Abner Hernandez from Orocovis. They're homies from back then, and now we do this work together. Nancy, there's a lot of people to talk, but not everybody does. So, Nancy, you're a doer, and you make us proud not only as Puerto Ricans and Latinos, but as a Philly girl, home girl, for sure. So, Nancy Santagio from HIP, keep us informed what you're doing, how we can support what you're doing. Thank you so much. Joel Berrocal from the National Puerto Rican Chamber, my new young boy, as I like to say. You keep doing what you're doing. We're going to keep supporting you. Y Charlyn, can you hear us, Charlyn? So, bendito Charlyn. I know she's dealing. I mean, she's literally like moving to different locations because of what's happening on the island. But yo le bendiga, Charlyn. You thank you so much for your spirit, and we'll be here for you however we can. I'm going to let these folks go. Thank you so much for all your leadership. And we're going to bring Albert and Leo onto the show for the final segment. But again, thank you so much, Nancy Santagio from HIP, Joel Berrocal for the National Puerto Rican Chamber of Commerce, and Charlyn Gaztambide Janel for her leadership and telling us what's going on the ground on the island of Puerto Rico. We're going to bring my homies Leo and Elby back on the show. Good to see you guys. So Elby, you got to connect with Leo now that you're back in the nation's capital. That was quite a conversation. I know, Elby, your family, Leo's family, I know on the island are concerned about these issues. So I know you enjoyed that conversation, but I wanted to bring you guys back to wrap up the show. And again, I want to thank Nancy and Joel and Charlyn for joining us. We're going to continue to monitor what's happening on the island. Leo, wanted to make sure you were able to share any final thoughts you had about either the conversation we had earlier about foreign affairs or what's happening in Puerto Rico, because as a former Obama appointee as well, and someone very engaged in foreign affairs, I know you're concerned about the emergency support that needs to happen on the island as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. And I think as far as the situation in Puerto Rico, my heart goes out to the island that is still yet to recover from one disaster and has now experienced it's not just one earthquake, it's been a round of earthquakes. And I think people just kind of lost track of it in the news cycle. I appreciated, the discussion earlier about the Jones Act. It's one of those pieces of legislation that people forget about until something happens, whether it's Puerto Rico or Hawaii or any of other territories are often forget of our colonial heritage in the United States. That the Jones Act restricts access to goods into these places that are part of the United States. And, talking about the Donald Trump DHS, FEMA, disaster relief, themselves being a disaster when it comes to Border Patrol, these are the little things that you have to consider that I think we looked at 2016. Where a lot of Americans were like, well, we want something different. We want someone to shake things up. This president has definitely shaken things up, but not for the better. And I think in every situation we've talked about tonight, whether it's been about foreign policy, whether it's been about what's going on in Puerto Rico, there's been something that we just haven't been able to resolve with this administration. So looking forward to hopefully a good result in November. And having someone that is able to build a team to take care of all these little issues to make sure that Americans are taken care of.
Yeah, it's amazing. Government actually needs to happen and do things on occasion. Charlyn, thank you for joining. Do you have any final thoughts from Puerto Rico? Si queda hablar en inglés, español, no importa, but I did want to give you the opportunity to say some final words from the island.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, that
No te apures, obviamente. You're dealing with extreme circumstances here. No, don't worry about it.
It's not easy. I'm going to speak Spanglish. No es fácil, we're going through a lot, but we want to thank you again. Queremos darle las gracias a todos nuestros hermanos, no solo puertorriqueños, latinoamericanos, que siempre nos están ayudando cuando estamos en estas situaciones. Así que gracias. Los esperamos aquí cuando todo se resuelva con los brazos abiertos. Y gracias nuevamente. Thank you so much for having us in your thoughts, in your prayers. I believe that prayers are very important, las oraciones. Así que por favor no nos abandonen. Además de la ayuda, le pedimos las oraciones. Muchas gracias. Y gracias, Rafa, por preocuparte por Puerto Rico y por tanto.
Seguro. Charlyn, before I let you go, Charlyn, I hope, si Dios quiere, I'm going to see you soon in Puerto Rico. Y voy a pasar con mi primo that's in the Army, Omar González. Check it out on WAPA. Es el novio de Ednita Nazario. Es el primo mío. Seguro. Y Ednita pasó. So Ednita pasó. My grandfather, Don Alfredo González, who was the vice mayor of Orocovis back in the days, who was the sergeant of arms of the island. You may remember him during that time period in the 80s, who was in the Korean War. Leo, we're going out history. He just had his 94th birthday in Dorado, or Jurabo. He lives in Jurabo. A few weekends ago, Anita stopped by, told mis tías. I got 30-something cousins on the island. So anyway, so there's a lot of synergy here with our families. And so I need to go take my kids and my wife to go see them. So when I go to the island, I definitely want to connect with you, Charlyn, and thank you in person for being on the show. Okay.
Definitely. That would be great. I would love it.
Wonderful.
So
thank you so much. God bless. Siga adelante, Charlyn. Thank you so much for joining the show. And Leo and Elby, if you can get back on the screen, brother. So I want to hit a couple of quick political things before couldn't have my two political pundits on before we touch on a couple of things. The debates, get on the screen, Elby. The debates coming up on the 20th. The guy who I initially endorsed, Julian Castro, not in the race, and now he endorses Warren. Power move. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens as we move forward. I don't know, Leo, if you have an endorsed candidate yet or how much you want to speak on this stuff, but I guess let me ask it to you this way. What do you expect? From your perspective, what are you going to be looking for in the Democratic primary leading up to Iowa at the beginning of February? What do you think is going to be the key things we need to look at as we get to the first caucuses and primaries, which are starting in weeks?
Yeah, and I think you hit on it earlier in some of your social media, talking about Castro's endorsement of Warren. And I know Castro has done a lot of work in Iowa, and I think that will probably help Warren in that state. Will be interesting is in New Hampshire in the race between Warren, Biden, and Bernie. because Bernie and Warren claim New Hampshire is close enough to Vermont and Massachusetts to be home turf. Biden, of course, has a legacy of campaigning in New Hampshire, so they've known him for a long time as well. So those three are going to duke it out in New Hampshire. But Mayor Pete's also hanging around. Amy Klobuchar is still there. We have these billionaires that are going to be getting ads in the Super Bowl. So, it's still going to be a toss and tumble. I have no idea how we're going to stay awake in February, where there's about 3 or 4 debates scheduled throughout the month. And so, we'll see how we survive come February and what Super Tuesday brings in March.
It's going to be a lot of fun. And one little tidbit I want to share with people is that keep an eye on, a little birdie told me that don't expect an interesting announcement from Tom Steyer tomorrow as it relates to the Latino angle or the Latino perspective on these issues. So keep an eye on that. And I know that, it'll be such interesting calculus because, and of course, we've been saying this for, I don't know, LB and Leo, about a year on the show. And now the mainstream media is coming around. Well, that California piece might change the dynamics. And the fact that in the case of Bernie Sanders, he sort of has invested a lot of resources in mobilizing not only Latinos, but sort of that Latinx younger crowd, woke young crowd in California could change the calculus because while people are caucusing in Iowa, that's also the first day of early vote in California. And when people are voting in New Hampshire, that's the first day of early vote in Texas. So I think that's where Julian Castro also could be a wild card. Can he deliver votes for Warren in the Southwest to places like Nevada and Texas? That'll be very interesting. The other thing I wanted to quickly note that we are monitoring that Senate race. We have, of course, John Cornyn, a Republican senator in Texas that's up this year. And there's sort of a crowded Democratic field. The DNC, to my chagrin, has endorsed a very moderate candidate. Someone actually voted for Trump. For Trump at 16, Ms. Hagar. But we haven't endorsed her. Our candidate in that race is Christina Zinzun, activist based out of Austin. And I wanted to report that she not only was endorsed by the Community Center for Popular Democracy this week, but she assigned on to Congresswoman Ayanna Presley's People's Justice Guarantee pledge. So she's making moves down there. And it's going to be interesting to see, Leo, who are these new, particularly Latino, Latina, diverse voices that come into the fray. We had, of course, the Squad and others that came in 18. A lot of military people came in 18 as well on the Democratic side, Leo. So what else are you looking out for with the political stuff that you'd like to share with us, Leo? I know you follow this stuff day and night. There's already Florida stuff popping off and lots of things happening, Leo. So just anything else you want to share about the politics?
Yeah, I think you hit it. We have a lot of great candidates in the House. There's possibility to still make gains. I think people show concern about us winning and flipping the Senate, but I still have hope, and I do believe there's enough movement around. Honestly, Georgia was the state that wasn't mentioned. They have 2 Senate seats up for grabs this cycle. Stacey Abrams has said she's not running for either one of them, but it will be interesting to see how that goes. You mentioned veterans running. There's a veteran, Cal Cunningham, running in New Hampshire, not New Hampshire, North Carolina. And those are battleground states. Also, the same blue wall that Donald Trump won of Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. Those are states where you would know better about the redistricting in Pennsylvania. Has seemed to make some Dem seats even safer. But, I think it's still going to be a battle in Pennsylvania. It's still going to be a battle in Michigan. The convention is going to happen. The Democratic National Convention is going to happen in Wisconsin. And hopefully that will give some spirit to the folks up there who have been fighting Scott Walker and the Republicans like Paul Ryan, who have been able to usurp Democratic control in Wisconsin. So, and there's a big Latino population. People forget about this in Milwaukee. Has a huge Latino population, and it's one of the largest Latino centers in the country. Most people don't know that, and I think it's something that we have to be able to get a candidate at the top of the ticket and down the ballot that will be able to get out that coalition that won Barack Obama his election in 2008, 2012.
No question about it. Two things. People are seeing on the screen an email address, info@phillyboricuas.org. That is a local group, Philly Boricuas, that's also doing disaster relief assistance. So for people that are listening to this on WPPMOP 106.5 Philadelphia, or just our Philly area people, you can drop off your donations with the Philly Boricua group at the corner of 5th and Huntington at the Providence Center during normal business hours. So if you're in Philadelphia and you want to support the movement, they need tents. They need lots of sort of issues now being displaced from their homes for the earthquakes. You can either email info@phillyboricuas.org, or you can drop off your donations at 5th and Huntington at the Providence Center. Check out this name, Michelle de la Isla, another name we got to watch. She is the mayor of Topeka, Kansas. She's announced she's running U.S. Congress. Leo Boricua, another Puerto Rican in the middle in the cornfields, brother, in the plains. She's looking for with the Wizard of Oz or something. But anyway, Michelle de la Isla, a friend of the show, is the mayor of Topeka. She's running for Congress, so another woman we got to support out there. And you know what? I got to shout out, because we gotta keep it real here. Shout out Jovita Carranza. Very quietly got confirmed by the Senate to be the head of the SBA. So Trump finally has a Hispanic back on the cabinet, or cabinet equivalent. SBA kind of a B-level cabinet position. Of course, she takes the place of Linda McMahon, who goes back to the world of wrestling. Leo, anything else about your foreign policy think tank work, or anything else you wanted to share on the show?
No, I'm just curious if they're taking donations at the Sixers games, if people are attending those. But otherwise,
okay.
It's
a fan of the tragic, the Orlando Tragic.
Yes,
See, the thing is, if you only watch Sixer Magic games in Orlando, you would think the Orlando Magic will win the NBA championship, because every time we go to Orlando, we're thinking about the partying we're going to do in Miami that night after we travel. It's just a disaster.
That's right. Yeah. So, but as far as back to actual foreign policy, I think what we have to keep hitting on is, and this isn't just foreign policy, this is everything that Donald Trump comes out of Donald Trump's mouth is a lie. I wish I could be more humble and more gracious to our current president of the United States, but it's every day there's something that comes out of his mouth that is untrue. I have great Republican friends. I wish the Republican Party to come back, but this is not the time that we're at, and this is not really partisan. This is the country that I signed up to serve. This is the country that I love. And, our politics and partisanship, I do believe, need to be put aside. We do need to hold this president account. I definitely don't want to see anyone else die for his ego. And so, I think we have a lot of work to do. It's beyond just 2020 and this election. I think we need to have a lot of conversations with our neighbors, having conversations like you're providing here, where we're able to talk to people and share and say, hey, look, it's not only the talking heads on cable news. It's people like you and me talking neighbor to neighbor and just trying to say, this is what we all believe in as America. We may argue about how to pay for it. We may argue about who gets what. But at the end of the day, we want this to be the great country that it's supposed to be. We know we're still working towards that. And I hope, whoever the Democratic nominee is, can rally everyone around them to say, this isn't just for party politics, but this is for really getting back America back on track.
And on top of that, not only the irony of the situation, Leo, is that the people that are going to bring America back to the values that it stands for, what the Constitution stands for, are, for the most part, people that look like you and me. And so the irony of the situation is that we're being attacked and questioned for our patriotism, our loyalty to the country, when in fact, it's actually quite the opposite. What we're striving for is something where, hey, we all want to give up. Hey, a lot of these people that were that have been disaffected by the process, that went the other way as a sort of a bank shot, we feel for them too. We don't want anyone to suffer. Some of the hardest hit areas with the opioid crisis are in middle America that, it's very white, very poor. And we don't want those people to deal with these issues. But the answer is not questioning me and Leo Cruz's Americanness, that's for sure. So we have to, as long as we deal with each other with that level of respect, we can do a lot of things together. No question about it. I want to thank my man Leo Cruz, my foreign policy analyst. You're going to keep coming back, brother, especially talk elections. I know you like to talk about that stuff too. And Dr. Pouya Alimagham, Nancy Santagio, Joel Berrocal, and of course, Charlyn Gaztambide calling in from the island of Puerto Rico, letting us know what's going on. And of course, our producer, Elba Garcia, is going to go talk to my goddaughter right now. Thank you for joining the Found in Translation talk show, whether you listen to it live here on Facebook or Twitter, on YouTube, or as a podcast, anywhere you download podcasts, and of course, as a radio program at WPPMLP Philadelphia 106.5 FM. Familia, stay involved. We ain't going to be silent. Support our people on the island and fight for this democracy because it's the only one we got. Peace.